The entire royal arena fell silent the moment the silver mark on Lyra Vale's wrist began to glow. Thousands of wolves froze mid-breath beneath the towering banners of Velmora as ancient light spread across her skin like living fire, illuminating the horrified faces of nobles who understood exactly what they were seeing. The Alpha King himself stood motionless at the center of the ceremonial platform, golden eyes locked on the trembling Omega servant, whose torn sleeve had revealed the impossible. For 7 years, Lyra had hidden that mark beneath layers of silk and fear, praying no one would ever discover the secret burned into her flesh on the night she turned 17. She had spent half her life running from the truth, surviving in shadows, convincing herself that if she stayed invisible long enough, then destiny might forget about her. But destiny had finally found her, and judging by the expression on Alpha King Kale Draven's face, it had just shattered the entire kingdom. 3 days earlier, the wind howled through the narrow alleys of Black Hollow as Lyra hurried home with a basket of bread tucked against her chest, her gray cloak wrapped tightly around her slender frame. Snow drifted from the rooftops in soft spirals, settling against the cobblestones beneath her worn boots, but she barely noticed the cold anymore. Years of surviving alone had taught her how to ignore discomfort. Hunger, exhaustion, loneliness, those things became background noise after a while. She kept her head lowered as groups of wolves passed through the crowded market district, careful never to attract attention. Attention was dangerous, especially for someone like her. A group of young alphas stood outside a tavern laughing loudly, the sharp scent of whiskey and arrogance thick in the air. One of them glanced in her direction, his eyes briefly narrowing, as if sensing something strange about her. Instantly, Lyra tugged her sleeve farther down over her left hand and quickened her pace. Her pulse hammered painfully beneath her ribs until she turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Only then did she allow herself to breathe again. "Stupid," she whispered under her breath, clutching the hidden wrist tighter beneath the fabric. "You're being paranoid." But paranoia had kept her alive. 7 years ago, she had awakened in the middle of the night screaming as unbearable heat scorched through her arm. At first she thought she had somehow been burned in her sleep, but when she pulled back the blanket, she discovered silver light glowing beneath her skin in the shape of an ancient wolf crest wrapped in thorn vines. She had recognized the symbol immediately. Everyone in the kingdom knew it. The Alpha King's mark, the divine mating crest gifted by the moon goddess herself. The symbol that appeared only once every few generations upon the wrist of the woman destined to stand beside the ruler of all wolves. Lyra remembered the pure terror that had seized her small 17-year-old heart that night. Because girls like her did not become queens. Girls like her disappeared quietly in alleyways while noble families fought wars for power and bloodlines. An orphan Omega from the slums had no place in royal destiny. Worse, if anyone discovered she carried the mark, they would either use her or kill her. So before sunrise, she wrapped cloth around her wrist and never uncovered it again. Years passed. Kings conquered territories. Nobles murdered each other over succession rights. Rumors spread about Alpha King Kale Draven growing colder and more brutal with every passing year after refusing all mating offers from the highest-ranking daughters of the realm. Meanwhile, Lyra survived by becoming invisible. She worked kitchens, cleaned taverns, served wealthy families who barely remembered her name. She learned how to lower her gaze, soften her scent, and avoid physical contact whenever possible. Because the mark reacted strangely around powerful alphas, it burned beneath her skin whenever one came too close, as though something ancient inside it was searching for someone. Searching for him. She reached the small servant quarters behind Lady Marrow's estate, just as the evening bells rang across Black Hollow. The old manor loomed overhead like a beast made of stone, its windows glowing gold against the darkening winter sky. Lyra slipped inside through the servant entrance and nearly collided with Mara, the head housekeeper. "There you are," the older woman snapped immediately. "Where have you been? The Winter Ascension Festival begins tomorrow, and Lady Marrow needs every servant prepared before dawn." Lyra blinked. "Tomorrow? Don't look so terrified. You should feel honored." Mara shoved a pile of folded garments into her arms. "The royal palace requested additional servants for the celebration. You've been assigned a wine service during the choosing ceremony." Every muscle in Lyra's body locked. "The palace?" Mara frowned. You look pale. Because the Alpha King would be there. Lyra felt the hidden mark pulse once beneath her sleeve, sharp enough to make her stomach twist. I can't go, she said quickly. Please, assign someone else. Don't be ridiculous. Mara scoffed. Do you know how many girls would kill for a chance to see the royal court? Lyra swallowed hard. You have no idea. That night, she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she dreamed of golden eyes watching her from darkness, while silver fire crawled beneath her skin. By morning, dread sat heavily in her chest like stone. The journey to the capital took hours by carriage. As the massive royal city of Velmora came into view, Lyra felt her anxiety growing worse with every passing mile. The palace itself towered above the kingdom like something carved by gods rather than wolves. All black stone and silver banners snapping violently in the winter wind. Hundreds of guests crowded the entrance halls in shimmering gowns and ceremonial armor, while servants rushed frantically through corridors carrying trays of crystal and wine. Lyra kept her head lowered as she moved through the chaos, praying desperately that she could survive the evening unnoticed. But the moment the ceremonial horns sounded across the arena, the mark beneath her sleeve exploded with heat. Her breath caught painfully as every instinct inside her screamed at once. He's here. The crowd erupted into cheers as Alpha King Kale Draven entered the arena, descending the marble staircase toward the throne platform surrounded by royal guards. Lyra made the mistake of looking up, and suddenly the entire world seemed to stop moving. He was enormous, taller than any wolf she had ever seen, broad shoulders draped in black ceremonial fur, dark hair falling around a face so sharp and intimidating it looked carved from war itself. Power rolled off him in suffocating waves, but it was his eyes that destroyed her composure completely. Gold, ancient gold, predatory and intelligent and terrifyingly alive. The hidden mark on her wrist burned so violently she nearly dropped the wine tray. Then Kale stopped walking. His head turned slowly through the crowd, and for the first time in 7 years, the Alpha King looked directly at her. Kale Draven had faced assassins, rogue alphas, and entire armies without flinching once in his life. But the moment his gaze locked onto the servant girl standing frozen near the lower arena steps, something deep inside him violently came undone. The scent hit him first. Moonlight and winter smoke. Ancient. Impossible. His wolf surged forward so hard beneath his skin that several nearby guards instinctively stepped backward from the sudden pressure of his alpha aura flooding the arena. Then he saw the fear in the girl's wide gray eyes as she immediately lowered her gaze and tried to retreat into the crowd, and something primal inside him snapped awake with terrifying clarity. Mine. The word thundered through his entire body before logic could catch up. Kale's heartbeat slammed painfully against his ribs as the silver crest beneath the skin over his heart began burning for the first time in over 20 years. Around him, nobles continued cheering, completely unaware that their king could barely hear them over the roar of instinct suddenly consuming his senses. He had spent most of his adult life believing the moon goddess had abandoned him. The royal maiden crest had remained dormant since Theodore's death, cold and lifeless no matter how many noble women the council pushed toward him. Over time, Kale stopped caring. He buried himself in war, power, conquest, anything that silenced the hollow emptiness left behind after losing his brother and inheriting a kingdom drowning in blood. But now the dead mark was alive again. Because of her. The servant girl panicked the instant his aura reached her. Lyra turned sharply, trying to escape through the mass of guests before anyone noticed the burning sensation crawling beneath her sleeve. But fate had always hated her. She collided hard with one of the noble women approaching the royal platform, sending an entire silver tray crashing onto the marble floor. Crystals shattered everywhere. Wine splashed across expensive silk gowns. Gasps erupted through the surrounding crowd. Watch where you're going. You worthless Omega. The noblewoman shrieked furiously before grabbing Lyra's arm hard enough to spin her around. The thin fabric around Lyra's wrist tore instantly, and the world stopped. Silver light exploded across her skin. The ancient crest burned brighter and brighter until it illuminated the entire arena like moonfire itself. Nobles stumbled backward in horror. One elderly alpha visibly crossed himself beneath the goddess crest hanging around his neck. That's the royal mark, Someone whispered in disbelief. Impossible. Lyra's blood turned to ice as thousands of eyes locked onto the glowing symbol she had hidden for 7 years. Panic consumed her instantly. No, 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 no. The mark suddenly pulsed again. Harder this time. A matching blaze erupted beneath Kale's collarbone, where his own dormant mating crest awakened in answer. The pain nearly brought him to his knees. Every wolf in the arena felt it. The bond. Ancient. Divine. Unbreakable. Silence crashed over the stadium like death itself. Kale stared at the servant girl as realization slowly settled through him with devastating force. The moon goddess had chosen his mate. Not a noblewoman. Not a royal bloodline. An Omega servant hiding in plain sight. And judging by the pure terror in her face, she had known for years. Rage hit him, so suddenly the marble beneath his boots cracked. Who touched my mate? His voice thundered across the arena with enough alpha force to shake the walls. Instantly, every wolf nearby dropped their gaze in submission. The noblewoman still gripping Lyra's arm released her so fast, she nearly fell backward. Guards rushed forward while panic spread among the royal court like wildfire. Lyra could barely breathe. Her wrist burned unbearably as Kale descended the ceremonial platform toward her with slow, predatory steps. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs refused to move. The closer he came, the stronger the pull between them became until she could physically feel his heartbeat echoing through her own body. It terrified her, because this wasn't a fantasy. This wasn't destiny wrapped in moonlight and romance like the old stories. This was Alpha King Kale Draven, the most feared ruler in the continent's history, walking toward her like a wolf that had finally found something it would kill to protect or possess. He stopped directly in front of her. Towering, silent, dangerous. Lyra kept her gaze fixed downward, trembling violently as his scent wrapped around her senses like smoke and winter forests. Look at me, he ordered quietly. The command slid through her entire body with unnatural force. Slowly, against every instinct of self-preservation, Lyra lifted her eyes to his. The connection hit both of them instantly. Kale's breath caught almost imperceptibly. Moon goddess. She was beautiful. Not in the polished artificial way court women tried to be, but something far more dangerous. Soft gray eyes filled with fear and strength at once. Dark hair falling loose around flushed cheeks. And beneath all that terror, loneliness so deep it punched straight through his chest. His wolf surged again. Mine. Lyra saw the exact moment his control slipped. Gold flashed brighter in his eyes. The air thickened with alpha power, so intense nearby wolves struggled to remain standing. Your Majesty, one council member said nervously from behind him. Perhaps the girl should be secured until we determine whether this is some kind of deception. Kale turned his head slowly. The councilman immediately went silent. Deception? Kale repeated softly. The deadly calm in his voice made several guards tense. You believe someone forged a divine mating crest? And no, Your Majesty. Only, she bears my mark. His voice became colder. That makes her untouchable. Lyra's pulse pounded harder. Untouchable? No, nothing about this felt safe. The entire royal court stared at her with barely concealed horror and hatred. Noblewomen looked seconds away from murder. Even the guard seemed unsettled by her existence. She understood why. If the moon goddess truly chose an Omega servant as future queen, it would destroy centuries of bloodline politics overnight. Kale studied her trembling form carefully before speaking again. What is your name? Lyra, she whispered. Lyra Vale. How long have you hidden the mark, Lyra Vale? Her stomach dropped. She hesitated one fatal second too long. Kale's expression darkened instantly. Years, he guessed quietly. She said nothing, but he already knew. Shock flickered behind his eyes before hardening into something unreadable. 7 years. 7 years his mate had lived alone carrying the royal crest while he searched the kingdom for enemies and traitors, completely unaware the one person tied to his soul had been surviving in fear somewhere beneath his own rule. Rage twisted sharply through him again, but not toward her. Toward himself. Toward the kingdom. Toward every system that had taught this girl destiny would kill her if discovered. Suddenly the massive arena doors burst open. A royal messenger stumbled inside breathless and pale. Your Majesty. Every head turned. There's been an attack at the eastern gates. Kale's expression instantly sharpened. What kind of attack? The messenger swallowed hard. Rebels, sire. But his eyes shifted nervously toward Lyra's glowing wrist. They were asking for the marked girl. Silence fell again. Lyra's blood went cold. Kale's entire body went still beside her. Then slowly, dangerously, he looked back toward the messenger. Who told them she existed? No one answered. Because the terrifying truth had already settled over the arena. The mark had only been revealed minutes ago. Yet somehow, someone else already knew about Lyra. And they were coming for her. The royal palace descended into lockdown within minutes of the attack. Massive iron gates slammed shut across the fortress while armed guards flooded every corridor and balcony with silver weapons drawn. But none of it eased the suffocating tension spreading through the castle. Word of the marked girl had already begun traveling through Velmora like wildfire. Servants whispered her name in terrified voices. Noble families demanded private meetings with the council. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, enemies were already moving. Lyra sat silently inside a lavish chamber she never would have imagined entering days ago, staring at the silver mark glowing faintly beneath the candlelight, while panic twisted through her stomach. She barely noticed the luxury surrounding her, the towering fireplace, silk curtains, marble floors, and carved royal furniture. It all felt unreal. A cage disguised as paradise. The chamber doors suddenly opened, and every instinct in her body immediately recognized him before she even looked up. Kale entered alone. No guards. No advisors. Just the Alpha King himself dressed now in black military attire, instead of ceremonial armor, dark hair still slightly disheveled from the chaos in the arena. The moment the doors closed behind him, the room seemed smaller somehow, consumed entirely by his presence. Lyra quickly stood from the edge of the bed, pulse racing uncontrollably. "Your Majesty, stop calling me that." His voice was low but firm. He crossed the room slowly, golden eyes locked entirely on her. "Not when you're wearing my mark." The words sent heat rushing painfully through her chest. Kale stopped only a few feet away, studying her face carefully as though trying to solve a mystery that had haunted him for years without him realizing it. Up close, he looked even more dangerous than he had in the arena. Scars lined parts of his hands and throat, faint remnants of old battles. His eyes carried exhaustion buried beneath authority, the kind that came from years of carrying power alone. But tonight there was something else there too. Anger, not directed at her, at whoever had forced her to hide. 7 years, he said quietly. You carried this for 7 years without telling anyone. Lyra instinctively wrapped her fingers around her wrist again. I didn't know what else to do. So you hid, wouldn't you? She shot back before she could stop herself. Silence fell instantly. The boldness of her response shocked even her. But Kale didn't look angry. If anything, something unreadable softened briefly in his expression. You think I would have hurt you, he said finally. Lyra swallowed hard. I think kingdoms destroy people like me. The honesty in her voice hit harder than accusation ever could. Kale looked away for a brief moment, jaw tightening. Because she wasn't wrong. Omegas were tolerated in noble society when useful, ignored when weak, and crushed when inconvenient. A servant carrying the royal maiden crest would have become a target the moment anyone discovered her existence. Who knew about the mark? He asked. No one. Then how did rebels attack the palace minutes after it appeared? Lyra's stomach twisted again. I don't know. Kale stared at her for several long seconds, and she could physically feel the bond between them pulling tighter the longer they remained near each other. It was becoming harder to think clearly around him, harder to ignore the strange ache in her chest every time his gaze softened slightly when looking at her. The mark suddenly pulsed again beneath her skin. Both of them felt it instantly. Kale exhaled sharply and stepped back as though forcing distance between them before instinct took over entirely. There's more happening here than either of us understands, he muttered. Before Lyra could answer, a violent scream echoed somewhere outside the chamber. Both their heads snapped toward the door instantly. Then came another scream, followed by the sound of steel crashing against steel. Kale's expression transformed immediately into something lethal. Stay here. He turned sharply toward the door. Wait. The word escaped her before she could stop it. Kale looked back. Fear clawed through her chest suddenly, not for herself, but for him. Which made no sense at all. Be careful, she whispered. Something flickered across his face so quickly she almost missed it. Then he nodded once and disappeared into the corridor. Chaos exploded through the palace moments later. Lyra rushed toward the balcony doors just as wolves began howling throughout the fortress below. Fires burned near the eastern towers. Guards sprinted across courtyards carrying silver-tipped spears, while alarm bells rang violently through the capital. Another attack, but this time it wasn't rebels. Dark figures moved unnaturally through the palace grounds below, slaughtering guards with horrifying speed. They weren't fighting like ordinary wolves. They moved like shadows. One of them suddenly lifted its head toward Lyra's balcony. Silver eyes locked onto hers from across the courtyard. Then the creature smiled. A violent crash erupted behind her. Lyra spun just as the chamber windows shattered inward. A shadow figure lunged through the broken glass with claws extended. She screamed and stumbled backward seconds before the assassin slammed into the marble floor where she had been standing. The creature rose slowly. Humanoid, but wrong. Twisted. Its silver eyes glowed unnaturally bright beneath a black hood. "The moon blood lives," it hissed. Lyra's blood froze. "What?" The assassin rushed her instantly. Lyra barely dodged as claws sliced through the side of her gown. Panic exploded through her body. She grabbed the nearest object, a silver candle stand, and swung desperately. The creature caught it effortlessly before throwing her hard across the room. Pain burst through her shoulder as she hit the floor. The assassin stalked toward her slowly now. "Our master waited centuries for your return." Lyra scrambled backward in terror. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You will." The assassin raised a blade forged entirely from black silver. "When he awakens." The doors exploded off their hinges. Kale entered like a storm. His wolf had partially surfaced now, gold blazing violently through his eyes, claws extended, raw alpha power flooding the room with suffocating force. The assassin barely had time to react before Kale grabbed him by the throat and drove him through the stone wall beside the fireplace. Marble cracked from the impact. The creature snarled and shifted fully into a massive gray wolf, but Kale was faster, deadlier. He slammed the beast into the floor and tore its throat open with one brutal movement. Silence crashed over the chamber except for Lyra's ragged breathing. Kale turned toward her instantly. "Are you hurt?" She shook uncontrollably, struggling to process what had just happened. He said, her voice cracked. "He called me Moonblood." Kale's expression darkened immediately. He glanced toward the dead assassin, then back at her glowing mark. Realization slowly settled into his features. Not fear. Recognition. "The old legends," he muttered. "I thought they were extinct." Lyra stared at him helplessly. "What am I?" Kale stepped closer carefully, as though approaching something fragile and dangerous at once. Then his hand gently closed around hers, covering the glowing mark with his palm. The bond between them flared violently. Silver light burst through the room. And suddenly Lyra saw it. Visions crashing into her mind like shattered glass. Wolves kneeling beneath silver moons. Ancient queens commanding entire armies. Bloodlines erased from history. And herself standing beside Kale on a battlefield covered in fire while kingdoms burned around them. The vision vanished instantly. Lyra gasped sharply. Kale looked just as shaken, because he had seen it too. The mark on her wrist glowed brighter than ever before. And somewhere far, beyond the kingdom walls, something ancient had finally awakened.